VikesNow, May 3rd. I'm Dustin Baker. We recapped some of the draft stuff yesterday, and I got my homie Josh Frey here today. We're going to go through some winners and losers of the draft. How are you, sir? And do you have a draft hangover now?
Yeah, I definitely have a little bit of a draft hangover the past couple of days, just trying to pump out more writing. It's just been, we're just grinding through it. We're grinding through it. But I mean, it's all good. We're going to be looking at this in June, early July, and be wishing that we had this much stuff to talk about. So I can get through it for now. I'm not going to complain too much about it. But yeah, it was a really fun draft.
When do you turn a serious eye to the 2024 draft class?
I think I'm probably going to take about a month or two off and then start looking seriously ahead to who's going to be like the best teams in college this year and start doing some profiles just for the team specific stuff and taking a shallow look at some of the top prospects for next year and then watch the season, get into January and really hit it again.
Right on. All right. Generally speaking, before we get into winners and losers from the Vikings' existing roster, what was your temperature on this draft for Minnesota?
I mean, I think this was a very safe draft class for the Vikings. I don't think they had any bad picks. I don't necessarily think they hit any home runs in this draft either, but I don't think we can complain too much about anything. Like Jordan Addison, I think he's going to fit in great with the offense. Is he going to turn into a Justin Jefferson type wide receiver one? Probably not, but he's going to be a consistent guy that can probably get you 1,000 yards a year. And that's exactly what the Vikings need right now. And then look at the Mekhi Blackman pick. I had him probably going a little bit later than 102, but you needed cornerback depth. He can play pretty much every position in the secondary, and you need that kind of guy. And he's got that dog in him, where
Mm-hmm.
he's a feisty defender. He's a mean tackler, and he just knows what he's doing out there. So I can't be too upset about that pick either. And then day three, you're just taking shots at whatever you can find. So you can't knock it too much either way.
It's worth noting on Blackman, he's 24 years old. And
Yeah.
so, per his internal clock, he should be acclimated to see playing time sooner than some of the most. I didn't realize about that on him until I started studying up kind of about an hour after the draft. And that was my only critique. And it's what you said. It's the same critique I had for the Lions in the first round. Is Blackman is going to be a fine pick, I think, kind of like Jabir Gibbs and the Campbell linebacker. Great, they'll be fine for the
Mhm.
Lions. You'll look back, be like, yeah, it's pretty good picks. However, for the Lions, I kid you not, they probably could have acquired about 3 second rounders for those guys by trading back and still getting them. And a Blackman to a lesser extent, because he was a mid rounder, Kwesi probably could have traded again and still found Blackman an hour and a half later. That was my only beef, and I think that echoes kind of what you said, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like yeah, with the Lions specifically too. Like everybody's saying like they won this draft just because they kind of just drafted backwards. Like you
Mm-hmm.
probably could have gotten Jameer Gibbs late day one, Jack Campbell early day two, and then taken Brian Branch at number 12. But if you can prove you've proven that you can go get Brian Branch in day two. So why not go get a lockdown corner day one and
Yeah.
go find like an offensive producer at 18 too? Like I don't know. I don't really get what the Lions did, but yeah, I think that you're 100% on the nose there with the Vikings probably could have traded back and gotten Blackman later on in day three. But there's also a chance that some other team had him super high on their board too, and maybe he's off the board by like pick 130, 140, wherever the Vikings were going to be picking next. So I'm not going to be too upset about it.
There's an eternal fascination between what a general manager's draft board, or in this case, the Vikings have, versus
Right.
Josh's or PFF's, the consensus big board. So, all right, let's get into this. Here's what I've asked. Set the table for the guys and gals watching. I want 3 winners and 3 losers from the existing roster, and these would have been existing Vikings players who either on draft night or Saturday night. For the winners, were like, whew, all right, baby, I'm starting. Or for the losers who saw the pick and were like, oh, really? Really? That's what I'm looking for. So who was one of the first winners from the Vikings roster?
Right off the jump, I think you have to look at this and say Ed Ingram is a big winner for the
Mm-hmm.
Vikings because I thought one of the big needs for the Vikings was going and getting some sort of interior offensive line presence to maybe compete for that starting job. And Ingram definitely had his fair share of growing pains during the 2022 season. So it was kind of up in the air as to how the Vikings may have felt about him. But it seems like they're pretty much all in with retaining basically the exact same core. And I really thought that they might have gone and got an Andrew Voorhees in the 7th round after they acquired that other pick. It was from, I can't remember if it was San Francisco or KC, but with that 222nd pick, and they end up going and getting Dwayne McBride instead. Mm-hmm. But I thought that Andrew Voorhees was going to be on the radar. He wasn't, apparently. And Ed Ingram seems pretty solid in his starting job right now.
Yeah, the Vikings drafted no offensive linemen, and a very prevalent theme from free agency and now the draft echoes what they said in their pre-draft press conference. We like who we have, who we drafted, and you guys may not be sold on them, but we picked these guys, and damn it, they're staying. Unlike the 2021 draft class, who was like a murderer's row for roster cuts last summer. All right, give me your first loser, so to speak. Not a loser as a person, but some guy that thought, oh God, when he saw the draft pick.
I think you got to go KJ Osborne here and pick. Those guys are, I think that Jordan Addison is basically a smaller version of KJ Osborne. He does a lot of the same exact stuff. And with Osborne potentially hitting free agency after this season, the writing's kind of on the wall that he might be on his way out in Minnesota.
Yep, and it's disappointing for him because he was a frequent voice in social media the last 3 weeks that seemed to imply that either he knew he was going to be the WR2 or he assumed he would be the WR2. And let's face it, if we're chilling doing this show week 6, October, blah, 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 and KJ Osborne's the WR2 and Addison's not getting that attention, we'll be a little freaked. We'll be saying, what's going on here? Assuming there's no injury. We like, it's a first rounder, fellas. In this day and age, they gotta be playing. So, yeah, I think Osborne, especially in a contract year, it's bad news for him because I think he probably thought he was the WR2, right?
Oh, I think he had to have, especially there was nobody else really there after Thielen left, and then they go and get this guy in round 1 who clearly, you spend a first round capital on a guy, you clearly think that he can be a starter for you. And I do think that there's definitely a world where Osborne, Addison, and Jefferson could mesh together in an offense for a few years, but at the end of the day, is it really worth spending? Like, Osborne's probably going to get a pretty decent contract next offseason, especially if he has something like another 60 reception, 600-yard season like he's had the past couple of seasons in Minnesota. So if that's the case, is it really worth a fourth weapon on offense, spending that kind of money on him, probably like 10, 15 million a year? I don't know.
No, probably not when you have Jalen Naylor, who in garbage time last year looked the part, and we'll see more of him this summer, autumn, and winter. All right, back to the winners list. First one was Ed Ingram, has no suitors to his right guard job. Who's the next one?
Next one, I'm going Brian Asamoah.
Yes.
I think, I thought that at 87, Trenton Simpson was starting to fall. I thought Minnesota might go get him, but then one pick before him, the Ravens swooped in and got him at 86. So that kind of threw that off the board. I think if he was still available at 87, the Vikings probably would have just taken him because why the hell not? He's probably an instant starter for a defense, and getting him in the 3rd round is just incredible value. The linebackers in general seem to really fall down the board in this draft for whatever reason. But with Brian Asamoah, again, it's kind of like the Ed Ingram thing. There's really not a ton in his way towards a starting spot right now. I mean, you could obviously say Troy Reeder, who they signed in free agency, could compete for that spot. He started a few games last year for the Rams, or was it the Chargers? I don't even remember. Chargers, yeah. So I think that moving forward, he's probably the starter. There's not much in his way right now either.
Yeah. Otherwise, you would have Jordan Hicks and Troy Reeder, which
both over the age of 30. Not super exciting.
That seems like something you trot out if Asamoah is hurt and Troy Dye is either cut or hurt, and then it's just a stopgap. Level with me here. All of this Ivan Pace Jr. smoke about being one of the gems of the UDFA class. Is this guy really going to make the team and eventually start?
I'd be shocked if he doesn't make the team, if I'm being honest, because the Vikings just don't have a ton of depth at that linebacker spot. And I think he's a legit guy. Like, he was a tackle machine at Cincinnati. He brings intensity, ferocity to every single snap on the defense. I thought he might have gone as early in day 3, like that 4th round was kind of where I had him projected. So getting him as a UDFA, and then Andre Carter too at the edge spot. I mean, this is just a crazy undrafted free agency class for the Vikings. So I think that there's a couple guys in this UDFA class who usually it's a guys that are just, they might be all right. They might maybe sneak into the roster. But I think they got a couple guys this year that could make legit case for not only making the roster but making an immediate impact.
Even if the kicker can somehow win a summer battle, he'd be probably the third. The thing, I think you can look at Pace from two different ways. I never really understand the YouTube censorship on here, so I'll keep it tame. On Instagram, he posted a graphic of himself, like breaking news to the Vikings, and he put, y'all done effed up. So either that is, just a childish rah-rah moment that, yeah, I'm going to be pretty good, or he really knows in his heart of hearts, like, oh, they don't know what's going to hit him. If he's exuding that bravado where he just knows, like, oh man, like, if he's laughing about it and just thinking like, oh, well, I'm going to make a Pro Bowl here in the first 3 years. And so what?
No, regardless of what it is, I love the mentality. keep on fighting, baby. Yeah, I love it. So yeah, I hope Ivan Pace as well.
Yeah, I think he'll make I even put out a way too early roster projection, and I think he'll make it. And it's mainly because of what you said, that if it comes down to Troy Dye or him, God bless Troy Dye, but I think you probably want more of a dog. And I think
and Troy Dye is not a crazy draft pick either. Yeah. So I think they'd be a little bit more lenient towards letting him go.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, the second guy whose stock dipped or could be called a loser in the loose definition of the word.
I'm gonna mix in two guys here for pretty much the same reasons. I'm going Dalvin Cook and Zadarius Smith because they didn't get traded, and especially for Dalvin Cook, it felt like the real target for him to go somewhere was Miami. And with the selection of Devin Achane in the third round, I just don't think that that's really an option anymore. Because in Miami, you got at least 4 guys that could, on any given week, pop off for 100 yards from scrimmage for you. So I don't think that Miami's really in the cards for Dalvin anymore. And Zadarius didn't get dealt. It seems like the more that this lingers, it just feels like these two guys are going to get cut and have to scrap to find somewhere to play in 2023. So I'm putting both of them, mixing them into the losers group.
Here's what I think would happen, especially with Cook, but with Zadarius to an extent. So Dalvin Cook deserved the red carpet goodbye. Like Adam Thielen got his day, Eric Kendricks got his day. But I think my personal theory is that the Vikings front office is disillusioned with his camp, not him, but his representation. So I think they're like, if you're going to play hardball, you're ruining it for your client, and we're going to wait until it's financially smart for us to say sayonara. And the same with Zadarius. Was it 8 weeks ago now? He said goodbye. And the Vikings were like, well, I don't know who you're talking to. Yeah, because it makes all the sense on the planet for them to wait until June 1st to make the move, because they'll save a bunch of money and they can be in the driver's seat to sign some free agents to really uptick the roster this summer. So I think normally they would do the culture thing, the respectful thing, and say, all right, well, yeah, we'll bend to your wishes. But if you piss them off or you blindside them, I think they're going to be like, all right, well, no, that's cool. We'll wait until the summer and then see what happens to you. That's kind of the way that I'm seeing that these playing out, because something would have already happened by now.
Yeah, no skin off our teeth. You do you.
Yeah. All right, your final winner, a benefactor from the 2023 NFL draft.
I thought about this one a lot, and I think I have to go Kirk Cousins.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Vikings didn't trade up and go get their quarterback of the future. I mean, obviously, they picked Jaren Hall in the 5th round, who I don't necessarily have a ton of belief in as their QB1 2024, even 2025. I think he's going to end up being kind of like a Case Keenum type, where he's a quality backup. He can start a few games for you in a pinch, but he's not going to be a guy where you're putting your entire franchise on this guy's shoulders to where he can lead you to a Super Bowl. So Kirk Cousins, if he wants his wish to stay in Minnesota for the rest of his career, it feels like he's a winner this weekend, because the Vikings really have no leverage moving forward. They're going to have to string something together in 2024 at least. And unless they just completely go off the rails and end up with a top draft pick to get a QB next spring, it feels like Kirk Cousins is still the guy.
And I agree with you for 2 main reasons. So based on where CJ Stroud, all of that draft smoke about him died the morning of, and he ultimately went number 2, kind of no surprise in retrospect. And then Richardson to the Colts, both of those would have been serious asking prices where you wouldn't want to hemorrhage the franchise by trading the farm. I get that. However, you had 2 other dudes in Will Levis who fell into the Vikings' lap. By the time it happened on draft night, it kind of felt like a fruition, like, all right, this tumble is real. And then the Vikings said no. But if you had told us or the Vikings March 15th that Will Levis was going to fall to 23, we would have jumped for joy. And by the time he got there, it was like, well, they know something's wrong with him, so they don't want him. And then Hendon Hooker, they could have found a way to get him in round 2 like the Lions did, which was a byproduct now of the TJ Hawkinson trade for anybody that's curious. Those were the two compromises to not go spend 2 firsts or 3 firsts on Anthony Richardson. It was to, for nothing, get Will Levis and then probably a trade back of some sorts to get Hooker. And they said no thanks. So yeah, I think we can pound the drum for excitement on Jaren Hall, especially for preseason games. We don't have to suffer through Sean Mannion anymore. But all he is a lottery ticket, especially at age 25. He realistically wouldn't see a Vikings regular season field in 26 or 27, like age. And then it's like, what are we doing? Kind of like Hooker. So I agree with you that Kirk Cousins won. I wish there was a reporter somewhere that the next time they're in front of a mic that says, hey, Kwesi, how seriously did you contemplate trading up the board? Very simple question. And maybe he'll say, oh, we always look at those scenarios and we examine everything for the draft. But if he could give a candid answer, like we explored it with the Colts, wasn't enough. They asked too much. I would really like to know.
Yeah, I think they definitely did, because if you've got guys like CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson on there, Anthony Richardson's ceiling is just through the roof, like Hall of Fame potential if he really gets that high. I don't know if he's actually going to make it that far, but that's where his potential is right now. If he can put it all together as a quarterback, and landing in Indianapolis, I think is a really great spot for him. And CJ Stroud, we talked about him pretty much the entire draft process too, as a guy highest floor. He can step in right away and be productive for you, at least as a pocket passer. He knows what he's doing. So I really think that they seriously considered it. But like you said, the price tag was probably just way too high.
Yeah. And if you think about a young executive, especially one who pounds the table for value, you are basically putting on your resume one thing, and it can emulate the Gobert trade. And if it doesn't work out, then there is smoking gun evidence that this guy's incompetent. Even if it was best laid plans, kind of like George Payton, looks like a moron now for the Russell Wilson trade. And I think Payton's been seriously minimized as anything, because Sean Payton is such a robust personality. I think Kwesi maybe wanted to avoid in his year 2. Maybe he just didn't want to pull the trigger because there's never a guarantee on a rookie quarterback, and thought, next year if I have to do this, maybe I'll have a little bit more draft capital, a little bit more grace from the fans or the ownership. We shall see. All right, your final, what is this? This would be a final loser. Yep. Well, who is it?
I'm going to go DJ Wanham here.
Oh, yeah.
Not really anything to do with the actual draft class, but again, Andre Carter, undrafted free agent. That's another guy that's going to be stepping in and looking to compete for a spot. Wanham's in a contract year. Patrick Jones took a huge step forward last year. So if those two guys really step up and the Vikings are looking at it down to the wire, it's like, well, we got to get rid of somebody. Wanham's in a contract year, and they can save $2.7 million if they cut him. So I think that would probably be where they'd go if they ended up having to decide between one of those 3 guys at that edge spot. So DJ Wanham is my last loser for this.
That's really good, because Patrick Jones, I think, has a little bit more upside and was a little more flashy last year. I think he had a wonderful game against the Dolphins and a couple other moments. So I tried to figure out over the weekend why Andre Carter didn't get drafted, and I watched some of the tape, and then I read some of the scouting reports, and the only thing I could really find was that he might be too lanky. But then he's 6'6" and 260. It's like, that ain't really lanky, folks. Is it his frame looks too slight, or why was this man not drafted from Army?
I think it really comes down to, he was incredible in 2021. I think he averaged like 4.5 pressures a game for Army in that season. He was one of the most productive pass rushers in the entire league. His PFF grade was tied with Aiden Hutchinson, who went second overall in the 2021 draft. But then 2022, it seemed like teams kind of caught on that, hey, we need to pay extra attention to this guy. And he saw a little bit more of a double team on some of the snaps, and he kind of struggled to deal with that. So I think that's why the teams were a little bit lower on him. And then the whole thing throughout the entire winter, is he actually going to be able to go to the NFL? But that's all cleared up by now. So that's probably not part of the final evaluation or anything. But yeah, I ultimately think it just comes down to, hey, this guy, he didn't play necessarily the greatest conference in the world. He didn't play the best competition. He dropped off a cliff in 2022 in terms of his production. I think he only had like 3 or 4 sacks this past year, compared to 15 that he had in 2021. So I think that teams are a little bit wary of that. And again, like you said, the lankiness of him a little bit. Like he's not like rail thin or anything like a Miles Sanders was last year or somebody like that. But I do think that that's part of the reason too. So, but I do the Vikings obviously their $340,000 contract that they gave him yesterday. They obviously have faith that he can make this roster, and I don't think there's any reason to believe that he can't be productive at the NFL level, especially if you're pairing him with a guy like Danielle Hunter, Patrick Jones, who are inevitably going to draw a little bit more attention than he is at the NFL level. He can slip in there and finish off a few plays for you.
Did Army have problems at times, or not problems, but maybe just a perk, like moving him all over the defense? It seemed like we tried to figure out during the draft lead up if he was kind of that Micah Parsons, like a linebacker, but then an edge. Was that true?
Yeah, I think that played a little bit into it too. And then he didn't test very well either leading up to the draft in terms of his athleticism. And I think there's a theory that part of it was because of the training regimen that he had that was required at the University of Army because you're preparing to go into military service, but he wasn't actually preparing to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of played a role into it as well. But yeah, it's a whole slew of things and you combine them all together and teams like, yeah, we're probably out on this guy. We'll let somebody else take a chance on him. And Vikings obviously are a team that's willing to take a chance and see where he's at.
I would say whether it was Kwesi's first UDFA or any from Rick's time, that having Pace and Carter in this class, it seems a little bit more special than years past. Last year, Luigi Villain was cool because he had the cool name and then he was supposed to be freakish. He made the roster. But I've tried to diagnose on these last 4 days, like, is this just UDFA hype that we always do? It feels a little bit more than that, probably because these guys were pegged as 4th or 5th rounders, correct?
Yeah, I think obviously the UDFA hype is going to raise these guys up a little bit more than they probably should be. Like, I think there's a few people that are a little bit too excited about Carter, and maybe he can be a starter this year or something. I don't think it's necessarily that far, but as a 4th or 5th edge guy, like we talked about on your roster, I don't think you can do much. I don't think you can do better than that. So you might as well go take a shot at this guy. And like the linebacker room for Ivan Pace, like we said, it's super thin. There's definitely a spot for him if they want to get rid of like a William Quinku or a Troy Dye. There's definitely a spot for him to fit into that room. And if he proves it in training camp, why not give him a shot? I think these guys can both do that.
Yeah, and I think we saw last year that when Kwesi put money where his mouth is with the guaranteed, I think he did the same thing for Luigi. So it's a good indicator that this guy at least will be on the practice squad, and then we'll see what happens with Marcus Davenport's 1-year deal, Zadarius, of course, and then Hunter's incoming contract extension or laughter up. All right, sir, we'll be back in 2 weeks, you and I. I have Lakers Warriors game 5 that I'm going to with my son in San Francisco. So you and I will have a week off next week. But who knows 2 weeks from today what we'll be talking about.
Maybe it'll be a Dalvin Cook trade.
Yeah, alas. All right, man. You have a good one.
All right.